Hello, everybody. How are you guys doing? Thanks for tuning in. I see we've got a couple of hundred people watching. Please remember to hit the like button. It helps it helps with the algorithm. It helps the channel to grow, and so more people see the video. I've got a very special guest with me today. Very important guest. He's Australian. His name is David McBride, and he's known most of all for being a whistleblower. Okay, so David basically blew the whistle on war crimes that were being committed in Afghanistan by Australian elite forces. So when we say elite, we're talking about the SAS, which is the Special Air Service. It's originally British, but there's an Australian version of it as well. Also the Special Boat Service. But basically, he blew the whistle on these war crimes that were being committed. And he served 2 tours in Afghanistan as an army lawyer. I think it was 2011 and 2013. Now, the problem is that the only person being charged in connection with these crimes is David. So the soldiers who committed extremely gruesome crimes, which we'll get into, they're not being charged. It's just him for telling the truth, and he's facing roughly 50 years in prison. And even ABC, who he basically gave them evidence of these crimes. They had their offices raided back in 2019. So you have the press being attacked, the whistleblower, in this case David McBride, being attacked, and that led to what are known as the Afghan files, which were published in 2017. Now, I want to talk about the latest event that happened in court. How are you, David? How are you doing?
I've lost the sound.
Can you hear me? I can hear you okay. I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm basically going to explain what happened, and I hope David's sound will be fixed by then. But there's something in Australia, a law called the Public Interest Disclosure Act. And this was passed a few years ago, and it basically protects whistleblowers, right? So the gist of it is that if you're going up the chain of command, whatever it is, it could be in the military or any other civil service or public service. If you're going up the ladder and trying to basically blow the whistle on an issue, and it's not being fixed and it's being ignored, you're allowed to go to the media, and you're allowed to go public with that, which is what David did. So he went up the chain of command, reporting these crimes, especially as a lawyer. That's his job to do that. They usually, whenever they're carrying out strikes, whether it's the Americans or Australians or whoever, they always have lawyers on standby who they consult. Is this legal? Can we do that, etc.? So they're always aware of what's going on. And he went up the chain of command, and nobody listened, and it was suppressed. So he ended up going to the media, to ABC. Like I said, the Afghan files are published in 2017, and then the offices of ABC are raided in 2019. And David McBride has basically gone to court just last week. Okay, so I believe the date was 27th of October. And he submitted a request for immunity from prosecution under the Public Interest Disclosure Act. And the government, the Australian government, basically quashed his application on national security ground. Isn't that great? So they basically said that the 2 expert witnesses that you need to qualify for immunity are not allowed to testify because it goes against national security. So that's totally not authoritarian, right? So I'm just trying to get David back in. Give me a second. There we go. So I basically just laid out the whole scenario about the Public Interest Disclosure Act, but I'll let David explain it. Can you hear me, David?
I can hear you now. Yep.
Okay, great. Your video's off though, but I'll put you back on. I was basically just going through the what happened on the 27th of October. Can you walk us through it and tell us what happened?
Yeah, look, it was unusual. they passed this act called the Public Interest Disclosure Act. Now, you would think that would help, and it's meant to enhance public interest disclosure. However, some strange things happened when we got to court, or the day before we got to court. The military had put in something with the Orwellian name public interest immunity claim, which doesn't have anything to do with the public or interest. It means sort of government information blackout. And funnily enough, this government information blackout applied only to my evidence and not their evidence.
So you're supposed to have two expert witnesses, right? And they said you're not allowed to have them.
Yeah. My expert witnesses, even though they're both civilians and professors, they were considered, their evidence that they were going to give was going to damage, get this, damage national security. And it wasn't even Australia's national security. It was a country that they couldn't mention the name of.
I have an idea.
They just called them our international partners. Could have been Indonesia, I guess. But the international partners felt that the information that my witnesses would give would be damaging to them, and so Australia said, "Okay, well, we will stop those witnesses." And the terrible thing about our judicial system at the moment is that the judge would have had to obey that. The judge, there would have been a little bit of argument back and forward, but if the government lawyers say, "No, Your Honour, this is really going to damage national security," he has to agree with them. And so my lawyer, who's Australia's absolute best lawyer, especially in this area, he's been at the top of the profession for 30 years. He said, we cannot win this. We cannot win this. And therefore, we should just withdraw it, and make quite a big statement to say, this is where it's come to in Australia, where the security services, and that the strange thing about the case is that the people that closed it down were not even the prosecutors, that were not even the people prosecuting me.
Wow.
For they are a separate government entity that comes to the courtroom, and they say, "Oh, we don't have a bias either way. But as it happens, all David McBride's evidence is illegal, and all the government's evidence is fine. But don't mind us." So it was pretty, and the rumours we've heard is that even the Australian Attorney General, who you think would be in charge of it, wasn't happy. He was like, "What? Why are the agencies, the security agencies, basically the sort of thing that won't surprise your listeners, viewers, but yeah, the security agencies." And I don't know if it's this. It's a little bit like the US, where in the Department of Justice, there's a great deal of interference by the security agencies, but like the Department of Justice ostensibly prosecuting Assange, but obviously it's not the Department of Justice.
Right.
And yes, in under the Attorney General's office, the spooks all work for in the Attorney General's office or thereabouts, and so they are able to influence the Attorney General, make it look like it's the Attorney General, but it's actually the spooks. Anyway, wow. It was very disappointing. We came out with the good news is we got a lot of public sympathy. People are beginning, as I said in some of my tweets, I used to worry that I would ever be able to illustrate to the Australian public how bad the problem is. I no longer worry about being able to illustrate that. And when you've got security services who are able to shut down the trial of somebody who is saying the security services are out of control, you can see it is a big problem. And the mainstream media doesn't really focus on it. And in some ways, the strongest weapon I've got is to go to jail with my head held up high, because that will demonstrate. Nothing will illustrate my case better than someone who only told the truth, who had impeccable record of service to this country. I went to Oxford and Sandhurst, and thinks we are doing the wrong thing. I produced documents which were not forged, and they put me in jail forever without the central issues ever being looked at.
Right.
And no one else from the whole war goes to jail. Not people accused of war crimes, not politicians accused of corrupt practices, just me. And I think the public will say, hang on, what the hell is going on in this country?
What country do you think it is that put pressure on I mean, I have to ask, but I think we both know the answer.
Yeah, we'll put it this way: they're a country that believes they hold all the information to do with the Afghanistan war as their property. Yeah, but I guess in some ways, as some people have pointed out to me, you're on the right track when the US is sending all of their operatives to Australia to shut down your court case. Probably most of Australia's secret intelligence agency, half the attorney generals, all of the Defence Department are all fighting you. You're obviously onto something.
Yeah. And the thing is, with the Public Interest Defense Act, it states, doesn't it say that you're supposed to go up the chain of command before you go public, which is exactly what you did?
You know how despicable it is. And this is why I had an epiphany this week, and I put it in my tweets to say, my team speak in terms of the way you'd imagine a patriot or a judge to speak. We speak in terms of protecting the public, abiding by the law, rules-based democracy, parliamentary democracy, truth, integrity, transparency. The sort of words prosecutors would normally use. And the other side use things like secrecy, our international partners, without saying, which just say nothing, and they talk like they're the mafia. And I've always said I wanted to put the government on trial, and now I've effectively done it because they are running for cover. They say, like any mafia don would, I'm not going to say anything. Nobody say anything. Deny, silence. And this is how pathetic their defense was to the Public Interest Disclosure Act, rather than say, well, there was nothing to see there, and there was no corruption, and there was no cover-up of war crimes. That's outrageous. They tried to say, I just complained to the wrong person. They're taking technicalities as a mafia person would, who tries to argue about the DNA evidence, even though they've been caught red-handed shooting someone. They are just saying, oh, he should have complained to person, General X instead of General Y. And had he complained to General X, we would have dealt with it. And that shows you the sort of people that they are. They're trying to run a technical defense of this rather than looking at the substantive issues. And that can only indicate, a bit like a criminal trying to avoid getting convicted of a murder because he's, on some sort of technicality of the gathering of the evidence, that they know they're in the wrong. I mean, it's only the criminals in defence that take technical evidence. Yeah, things like you didn't complain to the right person. And guess what? Guess who told me who I needed to make my complaint to? The Department of Defence. And so even though they're the ones who, it took a whole process took over 2 years, they were guiding it the whole way. And now they're trying to get out of it by saying, oh, but you didn't actually complain to the right person, even though they were the ones guiding the complaint process. So it's pretty pathetic.
Yeah, they're trying to cover up their own cover up.
Yeah.
And how does it look, from what's the next event or turn in court? I mean, now basically they've told you that because of national security and their international partners, you're not allowed to use one of the most vital tools in your defensive toolkit. So where do you go from here? What do you expect will happen next?
Yeah, lots changed now. Now both sides have doubled down. We're going to a jury trial. It has to be a jury trial under the Constitution because it's a serious Commonwealth offence. Now, I've always said I'm not afraid of a jury trial. I prefer to be judged by everyday Australians than by the military and senior public servants. But the problem I fear now is that I'm simply not going to get a fair trial. They've shown the lengths that they will go to stop my evidence going out. And the judges are powerless to stop them because they say, this is not the law, Your Honour. This is not about the law. This is about protecting Australia's national security. And so they're able to trump the law. So I've got no confidence anymore that I'll get a fair trial because they'll keep interrupting and saying, you're not allowed to say this, you're not allowed to say that. They would be able to do something like, because I'm considered a national security threat. This is, again, it's quite a good way to bring it, how bad things are, to the attention of the world and the attention of people of Australia. Because I'm classified as a terrorist, and it's more than just a word, it actually means they can do things to me that they couldn't do to someone who's just charged with tax evasion. Although, again, they probably could be charged, considered a terrorist. Because I'm considered a national security threat, it's not impossible that our security services would stack the jury. They would get people to pretend that they're everyday Australians. They would go to the court system in the ACT, and they would flash their badges, like in all the movies, and say, we're from the government. This is above your pay grade, but this trial needs to go a certain way in order for Australia to be protected in the future. You're going to hand over the jury selection to us. You're not going to complain. It's not illegal because we are protecting Australia from its threats. And they could do it. They could put spies in as jurors. They could influence the trial in lots of ways, and it wouldn't even be illegal. They would be treating it as if they were at war in Afghanistan, and they were putting in false information to try to fool the Taliban, which they did. You would know it all about it from Syria, sort of false flag operations.
Right.
We don't just do false flag operations, but the reason we get away with false flag operations is we say, we really want to go to war in Syria, blah, 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 regime change, whatever it is their goal is. And then they will plant the poison gas themselves, or whatever it is, they will kill people and blame it on the enemy. Now, we know that they do that around the world. The US is renowned for doing that. That's how they go to war. Weapons of mass destruction, for example. They got caught out on that. But people didn't think through the implications to say that wasn't the only time. That was the time they got caught. The Iran-Contra deal, for anyone old enough, which was pretty outrageous considering how publicly the US opposes Iran. But in order to get around funding of terrorists in Nicaragua and that part of the world, they were willing to do a deal with Iran, a secret deal. Why not? And nobody thought, they thought that was just pretty funny, Oliver North and whatever. Yeah, we'll do a secret deal with our enemies, supposed enemies. Maybe they're not real enemies, in order to finance terrorism. And so nobody in the Congress knows about it. So they can actually do that sort of stuff domestically as well. It's not very well known. But they could, I have a pretty good chance now, they won't leave my jury trial up to chance. But again, my biggest weapon is not to worry about it, to hold my head up high and to say, look, I like myself. I know I've done the right thing. My conscience is clear. I've been a soldier, and I'm proud of myself that I've managed to withstand 10 years of a very difficult process, and go to jail with an aura of confidence and likability, and my head held up high, because that will annoy them. They will hate that. They will really hate that. They want me to be coward. They want me to be like, oh my God, don't put me in jail, because that's what they'd be like. Most of the people I'm fighting, would do anything. They would give up any principle, any legal matter, if they were going to lose their lunch allowance. The idea that I would spend the rest of my life in prison because I believe I'm right, and I'm not afraid of that, that really scares them, because they think, who else is going to come after him? Imagine this guy who was very much inside the system, this guy who saw all the secret documents, this guy who's got 3 law degrees, he says we are the bad guys, and he is happy to go to jail. That will scare them. They'll probably try to smear me in some sort of way, but I mean, that will be the best thing I can. I thought about it last night, and you necessarily get caught up in the minutiae of your case. And of course, you, as a lawyer as well, you're thinking, maybe we'll do this, maybe we'll do that. But then last night I thought, look, don't try too hard. That will just give them satisfaction. Hold your head up high. Acknowledge you're probably going into a rigged casino. You're probably going into a rigged court, and nothing demonstrates how bad the situation is when the US are interfering in our court system to make sure I go to jail, even though I've clearly done the right thing. Yeah, I know. I mean, look, people forget the only reason Daniel Ellsberg didn't die in jail was they got caught out. The FBI were caught out breaking into his psychiatrist's office. Right. But on legal, as far as the law was concerned, he was guilty. And yet he is considered a hero. And people assume things have changed, but they haven't changed. They will put me in jail, and they are probably doing all those types of things now. But people have to stand up because it's getting out of control. We have lost our principles in order supposedly to survive. And people like me know it's not a matter of survival, not of the country anyway. It's a matter of the security services and the governments taking it upon themselves to ensure their own survival at the expense of all the things that we are meant to be fighting for: truth, justice, ethics, and it's disgusting. And it's good for me to verbalize it to you because it reminds me that I'm doing the right thing. It is pretty hard. I've got 2 teenage girls. It will be very hard for them. But I know it's right. And I know someone has to stand up. Other people are doing it as well, of course, Assange. And what is very lucky for me, there's about 6 major whistleblowers in Australia. There's another guy from the tax office.
Yeah.
It's hard if you're just on your own. The government and even human nature, people can say, oh, well, he's a bit of a disgruntled employee or whatever. But when there's someone from the tax office who's saying the tax office doesn't comply with the law and they purposely don't do it, when we've got someone that said our equivalent of the CIA bugged another country's offices, Timor, for the benefit of an oil company, and the 2 sort of politicians who authorized that, who shouldn't have authorized that, ended up working as consultants with that oil company after they left politics. So it's not just me. Other people are saying our country is rotten, and which is very lucky for me because it gives a real credence and it stops them doing the old whack-a-mole thing. Like, even if I was successful, making a scapegoat of an individual, but not acknowledging that it's not about a few individuals. It's about a system which is broken, and it's populated by so many people who no longer care about the law, no longer care about truth, but are actually running some sort of government interference plan on pretty much any issue. So I'm lucky that I have other people who all say the same thing. And the progress is slow, but I have a lot of support now. It's not enough to keep me out of jail, but it will grow. And people like you have been incredibly helpful. You were one of the first interviews I did. It seems like an age ago.
It does, yeah.
And it was good. It was really good. You gave me a fantastic run. Some beginnings of a little bit of publicity coming my way, and I'm very grateful that you always remember the first people you spoke to, the first time, the little milestones when things started to get better, and so you've always got a very fond place in my heart.
Thank you, I appreciate it very much. It's I mean, the thing is, I wanted to have you back on, not just because of the court date, but because I wanted to refresh people's minds about your case, because I feel like it needs as much coverage as possible. And there was the Afghan files that ABC published, and then in 2020 they had the Brereton report. But I don't know, do you feel like it was enough? Because I feel like the public consciousness still hasn't really grasped the scale of this whole thing, and then on top of the cover-up, it's what's happening to you as well on a personal level, and now on an international level, a legal level.
Yeah, look, I don't. If it's not the biggest principle, it's certainly one of the biggest. It's psychology. I was pleased that one of my expert witnesses, Clinton Fernandez, who got shut out of the case, he's written a book about Australia and America called Sub-Imperial Power, and he was one of the first people, because it's quite hard to explain these issues. I've got 3 law degrees. I work in the area. I've only ever been a soldier, so you see things at a sort of quite a high level in your own area.
Yeah.
But he was one of the first. I never met him, but he's one of the first person who really got it, and he really got the intellectual sort of side of it. And he made the mention of psychology today, when I was reading a bit of his book, which I thought was great. It's a bit like they're selling a product. They're selling cars or selling soap powder. And credit to the Americans, they are very good at salesmanship. And they, it is funny how it doesn't stick in people's imagination. All the information that I've been talking about, which shows how wrong things are going, is in the public domain. Yet it's frustrating, and you'd be the same. It's frustrating that it doesn't necessarily take a hold. He said it needs reinforcement, and with the corporate media on board, there could be change. Immediately I could be saved, because they would just be saying, really, so many things were wrong with the Afghanistan war. And this guy said so many things were wrong with the Afghanistan war. We now know that there's Ben Robert Smith defamation trial has revealed a lot of unsavory secrets. It looks like, for example, he wasn't going to get the equivalent of the Congressional Medal for Honor, but they gave it to him over some other more deserving people because he was so handsome and he gave such good press conferences. And the people who were in charge, it wasn't his fault, but that was the PR people selected him especially to give for this famous medal because he was going to bring better PR. Now that's disgusting for a professional army. That's disgusting, and to think that wasn't a one-off. The people behind that, there would have been 20. Their best friends would have known, and their best friends' best friends would have known. That to me shows how much public relations has become to dictate our war, and all sorts of wrong. So all of these things are in the public space now. We even know the person who was the head of the military at the time, who had a very good reputation. And when I used to criticize him and say, look, he must have known what was going on. He was the head of the military. He signed off on everything. The politicians then promoted him after he left the military to sort of, you don't have an equivalent in the US, but in a position called Governor General, it was he's head of our state effectively. Now that's a sort of a thank you. It looks suspiciously like a thank you, and just by accident, he got caught out signing off as Governor General on some things which he shouldn't have signed. He did it without publicity, and it's been a bit of a scandal, but that has been quite good for me because I can say, finally, and people didn't want to hear criticism of him, to say this guy's a yes man. He signed things and his justification was, oh, this is good for national security or whatever. But he didn't care about the law. And that is being looked into. Now, if findings come out against him to say, yeah, he shouldn't have done this, he should have known better about signing secret documents which were basically illegal, that will help me. But again, it won't necessarily get me out of jail, even though I'll be like, really? So the person who I'm most accused of wrongdoing, it's clearly that he is the sort of person that does the wrong. He was rewarded after it looked like he covered up the war crimes. And the war crimes clearly happened. The PR departments were actually running the war. And we've also had the collapse of the Afghan regime, which we installed at the cost of $6 billion or whatever, trillion. And that collapsed in a week, and the president ran off with, a helicopter.
Right, I was going to ask you about that. Yeah,
yeah. Now, and you'd say, put all these things together, all the things that David McBride said, and you're still trying to put him in jail. Now, and all of our training is you need to speak up. All of our training is to stand up. We even have a thing called moral courage, which is one of our central elements of the Australian Defence Force, which means standing up, doing the unpopular, sticking to your guns when you know you're right. And I don't know how they teach that today, but you would have thought some of the students, if they were brave enough, would be saying, what about David McBride? Didn't he have moral courage? And how come you're still trying to put him in jail? So it's a little bit, it's counterintuitive, but as I said, I'm trying not to worry about it too much because eventually it'll just come down to myself and my conscience and my self-respect. And if I can, maybe the best thing I can do for the nation and the whistleblowers of the future is to go to the jail looking like a leader, looking like a man, and show people that there is a great amount of dignity in doing the right thing, and knowing that you're right, and all the sort of spin that the government will put out, all the sort of excuses and waffle about why I'm actually a bad person, even though I look like a good person, will just fall away, and they will end up looking worse by putting me in jail than if they'd let me go free.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It takes immense courage what you have done, and many of the whistleblowers you mentioned, because it comes at a huge personal cost. It's not just they try to make it about it affecting national security or affecting the nation, but in the end, the one who's affected the most is you. Because I said this at in the intro, that out of this whole scandal, no one's been charged for the war crimes. It's just you. And you mentioned the corporate media just a few minutes ago. I was wondering, because you gave some of those files to ABC, and they got the story out. How is their voice right now in regards to your case? Are they advocating for you? Do they, is there a lot of support, or are they more silent? Because I thought that would be an interesting thing to ask you, given that it's a few years on now, and the heat is being turned up.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. The thing about the ABC is they're a government media organisation, and they have this ambiguous relationship with the government, and the government pays, the government sponsors them. The government could shut them down overnight. And while they want to, there's a lot of good people there, and they want to, they do some fantastic journalism. They always have done the very best journalism, fearless and very thorough. But there are limits. There are sometimes edicts from the government, and they obey them. And this is probably too hot for the ABC, because it's a bit like biting the hand that feeds you. It's a bit like a snake having to turn around and bite its own butt. I don't know. They're giving me low-level help. I shouldn't even say that. They might get sacked, but they certainly they have run some very, very good stories. They read a story called The Killing Fields. It's focused mainly on bad soldiers.
Yeah, I remember that.
But yeah, nothing illustrates how bad the situation is when on The Killing Fields. If viewers, you see a soldier shooting dead an Afghan sitting in a field with prayer beads and asking permission whether he should do it or not. He obviously gets the thumbs up. Yep, bang, bang. Now, that guy hasn't been charged. He hasn't been charged. Now, you reckon they might have a pretty good case against him. But no. But they're obviously waiting for more information to come in or something. That shows you. Anyway, so the ABC put out there, that can only help me. And I can understand why. I'm saying it's bigger than a couple of bad soldiers. I'm saying it's more like Watergate. I've always said that from the beginning. It's not it's not the My Lai massacre. It's Watergate. Well, the My Lai massacre obviously ended up having a lot of political connections and political implications to it, in the way that they eventually let the main perpetrator out of jail, and they didn't blame anybody above the sort of lieutenant level. But this is more like Watergate. This is people at the top knowing about a crime, if not actively encouraging it, and then trying to using the security services to cover it up when it becomes. And unfortunately, the era of Watergate, where corporate media entities will run a story which could topple a government, it seems to have gone. Unfortunately, we learned a lot of the wrong lessons from Vietnam. We certainly didn't learn not to go into the Middle East, South Asia, and start wars that we couldn't win on spurious grounds. But we did learn how to muzzle the press. We did learn how to get corporate media on side through tax arrangements and various things where they will never bite the hand that feeds them. Yeah, and now I don't think we're ever going to have a Watergate story anymore. And so I have to fight it myself, which is maybe that's good. I'll get more glory. But Assange would be the same. He'd be another good example of a story which is too big, a story which, fringe, smaller the media outlets might run, but the big conglomerates that could actually cause a government to fall are going to stay away from it. And that is a shame, because it means we no longer care about values. We no longer care about truth. We no longer care about the law. And even though they know the law has been broken, even though they know people like me are actually standing up for the values that they ostensibly represent, we are the ones who have to be sacrificed. And as I said, maybe only by that sacrifice are we actually going to bring the point home, and people to say, hang on, this guy's prepared to go basically die in jail for this. Maybe we should pay attention to it. But it's one of the, I can't rely on any media support. And what's worse is that I live in fear every day that the government could put out a smear campaign like they did with Assange, and that will be running the corporate media. They'll run with that.
Yeah, of course.
If there's some sort of something in my personal life which they can grab onto, that will get the corporate media attention. But the idea that major things are wrong in this country and they need to be fixed, I probably have to go ahead without expecting any major support in that area. Maybe they will bayonet a corpse, as they call it out here, and maybe if I do land a killer blow on someone and they are already going down, the corporate media may jump on board, a bit like medieval. So when they could see the winning side, but at the moment, but that's why I'm so grateful to you. Even my lawyer, who didn't want me to speak to you in the beginning, he's become a fan, because he said we've done so many underground YouTubers and media, small media outlets, a bit like Gulliver's Travel, with our masses of small media outlets like yourself. We have managed to tie down the giant, and that's a model for people to come after me, to say, talk to all the YouTubers you can, talk to all the tiny radio stations you can, because eventually that becomes some sort of a critical mass. So I'm very grateful for your work, and I want to encourage you, because
thank you. I appreciate that very much.
Part of a big show. Yeah.
Now, it especially coming from you, because you and Assange, I always have you guys in mind because of, not just because you're both Australian, but because you at great personal risk and personal cost, you basically told the world what had to be heard. And you mentioned that video just a few moments ago, the Killing Fields video. I remember that very clearly, and I remember everything I read in the Brereton report and the Afghan files, and it's horrific, and the funny thing is that in England, the SAS in England is doing the same thing. I'm pretty sure you read the Sunday Times, BBC, when they released those emails a couple of years ago. It was the same MO.
I was lucky enough to be asked. I was on the second Panorama show by the people that did that. They interviewed me. They came to Australia. They interviewed me. Another guy called Brendan, who would or Brandon. He'd been on. He was an ex-SAS bloke who was on the Killingfield show. Yeah, and they showed me those files. They said, as a military lawyer, if people came in 3 times in 2 weeks saying, "Oh, we took the detainee to the bedroom to search for other materials," he was handcuffed, but he managed to grab a grenade which was behind the curtain, so we were forced to shoot him dead. And that happened in 4 days later, and happened 3 days later again, and it was the same cut and paste statement. What would you think? And I was able to say, that's a murder. They are murders. That does not happen, particularly because that's very unprofessional. If that really did happen even once, that's extremely unprofessional behaviour by the SAS to allow that. And they would have had to have taken action against the SAS soldier that allowed a detainee who didn't pay enough attention that they were able to grab a weapon while they were handcuffed. And of course, no one was ever punished because it never actually happened. People within the SAS organisation, people at my level, majors and captains, knew it was wrong, and they were like, really? What are we going to do? And he just said those emails show that. And what is particularly despicable was strong cases against those people were prepared by the military police, and all of them, not 90% of them, all of them were knocked on the head, and they were all knocked on the head. Again, with false reasons, saying, "Oh, there's not enough evidence." Oh, well, quasi-legal bullshit reasons, and not a single one resulted in a charge. And that can only be political interference, because there were stronger cases than Australia. Even I mean, it was really clear cut. It made the Australians look like master criminals in the way we covered up our murders far better than they bothered to cover up theirs, and yet there wasn't a single trial. And what I suspect is what happens in Australia. Even though these trials were prepared, they did opinion polling. The government would have done opinion polling, and they would have found a lot of their conservative swinging voters, those people that vote blue one year, red the next, they don't like the idea of soldiers, especially the special forces, being put on trial. And because the polling showed the trials would be unpopular, the trials got shelved. Real tail wags the dog stuff, which is exactly what I pointed out in Australia. Polling was running the war. Polling made certain people, that's why we made this handsome guy, he got the Congressional Medal of Honor, because he was so handsome. And he looked the part, over other people who were rough around the edges, but had done braver things. Now, because the PR was more important than the truth. We actually it wasn't just about putting soldiers down. The first thing that alerted my suspicions, we were actually trying to scapegoat some good soldiers who got involved in scrapes, but they were clearly defending themselves within the rules of the law against a suspected Taliban who was trying to kill them. Now, our government was so cynical, they tried to put them in jail because the political winds had turned, and the media wanted some scapegoats, the media wanted some scalps. The Australian Defence Force wanted to get the International Criminal Court off their backs. So we were looking for scapegoats, and sometimes those scapegoats were good soldiers who'd done 6 tours of duty for their country. And I said, no, we're not going to put good people in jail in order for you to cover up the actions of the bad. That is disgusting. And so, yeah,
It's basically what they're doing to you.
a,
They're doing the same thing to you now.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's pretty ironic, but I guess that's right. Yeah, they're trying to say, "Oh, we've done something about the Afghanistan war." Yeah, we've put someone in jail. The guy who said everything was wrong, we put him in jail.
David, I know you've probably talked about this a million times, and I've talked about your whistleblowing, and I'd still like to repeat this to the viewers. Could you just maybe tell the viewers some of the crimes that you saw either in person or the files that you gave to ABC? What are some of the worst things that stuck in your mind? Because I feel like it's really important to illustrate this to people that are listening, so they can understand the gravity of what happened, and also the unfairness that the people that committed murders walk free, and you're the one who is charged.
Yeah, no, it was bad, and as I've said, if the war crimes were a symptom of a larger problem. And the larger problem, I mean, it's a bit like, particular things happening in Syria. And it's not so much bad as they might be. False flag attacks, for example, that might kill 10 people. But the real problem is that false flag attack was put in by the US High Command, which was told to do it by the American presidential administration, and in order to have a war and a regime change. So the higher up you get, the bigger the problems are. And that was the case in Afghanistan. As I said, we promoted people who had clearly, back in 2006, someone shot a shepherd boy and claimed that they were a spotter for the enemy, and they got a medal for it, basically, even though they'd done the wrong thing. And that set the train. We started rewarding murderers, and by 2012, things had got out of hand. They'd learnt bad lessons from the British SAS, who said, all you have to do is shoot someone, doesn't matter who they are, and you plant either a weapon on them or something called an icon, which is a little walkie-talkie, easily carried in your pocket. So you shoot a farmer dead, take the walkie-talkie out of your pocket, put it next to the dead body, take a photo, and say, "Oh, this guy was on the radio." And then you put in ultimate cynicism, you put the walkie-talkie back in your pocket and you save it for next time. And in 2012, it all became about kill counts, and there was a competition to see who could get the latest kill count, basically. One time, this is all stuff which came out in the Brereton report, they had an engagement with some Taliban. This was a fairly typical operation. They might have killed the wrong people, they killed a few civilians, and they turn around and there's 12 Afghans looking at them, standing by a tractor, who are clearly some sort of onion farmers, and they say, shit, we've got witnesses, what are we going to do? Bang, 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 no more witnesses. They were all Taliban. And it was pretty bad, and the guy who did the inquiry was a judge, and he was very fastidious, and he said that there were 39 credible cases, but he basically said there were 39 murders, because he looked into it very clearly. There's still the chance that they have been investigated, but he said 19 soldiers involved in the murder. I mean, the main problem was not so much the numbers; it was actually that these key corporals in the SAS, a couple of them, because people underneath them actually have a duty to do what they what they're told. So it was mainly the people in leadership positions, although they were relatively low down, had the idea that they were just going to kill Afghans, any Afghan they came across, because by doing that, they would create a climate of fear, and that the Afghans would consider the Australian forces more scary, more ruthless than the Taliban. And as a result, we would win the war because they were so scared of us. In slang, in Australian slang, it was called going up the Congo, in a reference to Apocalypse Now and Colonel Kurtz and the original Joseph Conrad story. Some of the stories in Brereton are pretty terrible. People having their throats cut up. I don't know whether all of it is true, but it's certainly it was disturbing. Now, what I found most disturbing, that all happened in 2012. In 2013, there was, as I said, they were looking for scapegoats. Everything changed. I think what happened in 2012, the generals, the leaders of our army, found out about how bad it was. They found out they'd been people that they had personally stuck the Congressional Medal of Honor on were actually psychopathic murderers. And so they've really feared that if the press found out, not only would the soldier, the murderer, go down, but they would go down for not knowing or not doing anything about it. So in 2013, there was a rush for scapegoats. And this is, I think, is the most disgusting of all. The generals, knowing that their favoured people were murderers, tried to put non-entities in jail to keep the press happy, because the rumours were swirling around and everyone was saying, is this true? Is this true? And so in order to get the press off their tail, they were just going to put anybody in jail in 2013. And this is when I came in and I was like, hang on, we've got all these rumours of murders a year ago. You haven't investigated one of them. Now you're investigating anything. You're investigating things which could not possibly be a murder. What has changed? And of course, then as soon as I started asking that hard question, not surprisingly, I became the problem. There was someone in the organisation that suspected what was going on, and then they went for me and they tried to, psychologically review me, mandatory psychological, which is a way of throwing someone out, putting them in the loony bin. I think they sent me to a psychiatrist who gaslit me and said it's all in your imagination, and the only reason you're doing this is because you have a sense of entitlement. They got caught out. The government got caught out. Again, it's in the public space. They got caught out at the same time of finding other government whistleblowers like myself, potential. They would send them to a psychiatrist, a particular psychiatrist paid for by the military or by the government agency. And that psychiatrist that was speaking to the potential whistleblower would gaslight the whistleblower and say, you don't have a leg to stand on. It's all in your imagination. It didn't really happen. This was a government plan to mess whistleblowers up. Now, that's absolutely disgusting. Now, they disgusting. Got caught out and they had to pay compensation. And it's in the public domain. But you'd think people would, when you put that, there'd be no way I'd be facing trial, because they did that to me. And it took me a while to think about it. I didn't even get it, because you're seeing a psychiatrist and he's a civilian and he's very smooth, and you don't immediately cotton on because you've got trust in these people. But afterwards, I think, hang on, what? He's not a lawyer. Why is he telling me I don't have a legal case to stand on? And it was strange. And so they when I made an internal complaint, they said there was nothing in it, and so on and so on. So it's actually proves the bigger things that your listeners and viewers will know about, that it wasn't so much the war crimes, but it was the fact that they were prepared to cover them up. That the war crimes were done with encouragement and complicit relations between the leadership and the soldiers. And then when it came to light, the leadership tried to cover up those war crimes. And then when someone like myself cottoned onto the cover-up, they tried to destroy me. So it's all quite big picture stuff. It's a bit like the whistleblowers who suggested the false flag gas attack in Dore, I think it was, or the various ones, and they were legitimate experts on the area from the United Nations, how they were destroyed by the US and their proxies. So it's a much bigger issue than just shooting dead of a few villagers. And of course, that's why I believe it's really important to fight. I don't particularly want soldiers going to jail. That won't solve the problem. This is why I keep having it. If it was just about a couple of war crimes, we could put those corporals in jail, and that'd be the end of the problem. But unfortunately, it's not the case. It's a much bigger problem than that. Putting a few corporals in jail will not solve it. It's not so much about the last war, it's about the next war. And if we don't sort out the fact that our defence force is really just a political pantomime operation which popularizes whatever war the politicians want to take us to, we'll be fighting wars forever. We'll be in a war with China before we know it. Funnily enough, they're already talking about it. Have been. I'm sure that we will go to war with China because that's what the Americans want. And they're going to war with China, not because of the Uyghurs, not because of Taiwan, but because China is an economic rival to the US. I believe that we will go to war in Russia. I didn't expect, the tactics in Russia are the same as in China. You encircle a nation, you put pressure on that nation, you pinprick until they respond. And when they do respond, which you know they're going to, you go, oh my God, this is aggression from these totalitarian states. We have to go to war to save Western democracy. But the whole thing has been a pantomime, a bit like the weapons of mass destruction, where you wanted a war and you needled until you got a war. And the idea that you're fighting for democracy is just completely made up. Now, unless we stop this sort of short-circuiting of our important institutions, of our security services, unless we get the corporate media to actually cover the truth, unless we get back to basic principles and get out of this sort of survival mode that the US has been in since 2001, where anything goes as long as it will, as long as it supports US expansion. Now we have to stop that, as I said, and one of the things I don't want is it just to be focused on war crimes, because they will be able to pretend, oh, we have fixed the problem, and then we'll be going straight into a war with China or Russia, which would be a disaster because it's been fought for all the wrong reasons, and it will have failed to fix the problem now. I'm trying to shine a light on these very, very big issues, which is hard, of course, but saying that, it has to be done. I can't walk away. It's not my one of the ironies about my case is that I'm doing exactly what the military trained me to do, and that is to fight for my country, fight for the principles of my country. It's been hijacked by people who have only got self-interest involved, and it means not stopping until I've either achieved the aim or I'm dead. And it's exactly what I've been trained to do by them. And I like to, there's a certain amount of irony. I like to use all their own weapons back on them. Information operations, getting the message out, psyops if necessary, and even using some of their quotations. There was a famous general who I talked about before, who is now in trouble for being a liar and a yes man. But he had this saying, which stuck in my throat at the time because I knew he was a liar and a yes man then. But he said, "The standard you walk past is the standard you accept." And I have great pleasure in quoting that back to him and my enemies, because even though that was a saying of someone I think was a complete creep, I like to use it, it's undoubtedly true, against them and in justification of my own case. They try to say I'm not, I'm a traitor to Australia, but I believe I'm one of the few people who is actually fighting for Australia against thousands of people who are actually fighting for the government, and there's a difference. They're not the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, they say things and don't actually apply them, and when you apply these principles, they go after you. So, I mean, you mentioned China. I was actually going to ask you about AUKUS. This military alliance now between Australia, the UK, the US, the nuclear-powered submarines that the Americans are going to give Australia. I mean, I know it's sort of a rhetorical question, but does this look like they're just trying to provoke the Chinese, and it's just a matter of time before they start a war with China? I know that there's been a lot of bickering and bitterness between certain Australian politicians and Chinese politicians, and especially on the topic of war crimes, right? There was this famous tweet that some Chinese politician posted about, with an Australian soldier butchering, I think, a lamb or something, and then Australia demanded an apology and an official apology and so on, and I think it's worth reminding the viewers that China is Australia's largest trading partner, right? So the madness of it all, what do you make of it, David?
Yeah, it illustrates everything I've been trying to say. China was Australia's biggest trading partner during a time when Australia had incredible economic growth. China was good for Australia. And then suddenly, Mike Pompeo told Australia that we were actually China was our enemy. We needed to go to war against them, and everything changed because the Americans told us that we had to change. We will be going to war against China, or in a war. In fact, we're already in a war state with China, because we're a member of something called Five Eyes, which is not well understood, and I think we should never have done that without the Australian people knowing. But it basically means it's like a NATO, worse than a NATO, but America's in charge, and all the other little countries now just do what America wants. And America's enemy is China, economic enemy. So now we are all geared, we're all at war with China, whether we tell the public or not. But that's where our intelligence is concentrated. Anything else is kind of a sideshow. Maybe a little bit of Russia, but we don't really care about what's going on in India unless it affects the US and China. Everything in the South Pacific, it's all about the US and China. All our sensors, all our radars are focused on China. We're actually
Pine Gap also.
Pine Gap. Bombers were putting new B-52 bombers in Pine Gap, or in the Northern Territory, so they can bomb China. And yet we wonder why the Chinese push back. And of course, all the news we hear from China is highly spun out of control, the Chinese can sort of say, well, we don't like the idea of you getting B-52 bombers in Australia, and then talking about bombing us. And of course, we'll paint that in our corporate newspapers. We'll paint that and say, China ready for war. China threatens Australia. How dare they? And everything we read about China is propaganda, politicized stuff. And no matter what they say, no matter how reasonably based, no matter how much it is in response to what they see as aggressive measures by us, we paint it as unprovoked aggression by China. And as some people have pointed out, again, it's in the public space, China is not taking over the world, but America is encircling China with bases and right around its territory. And we are again, a bit like the Ukraine issue, we are baiting them and trying to find flashpoints. I heard 2 years ago from my friends in the military, we will be at war with China in a few years. It is the plan. It is good for politicians. It's nothing like we saw from George W. Bush got re-elected in 2004. Obama got re-elected. He would have got elected a third time if it was possible. Starting new wars, dropping bombs. It makes people look presidential. Trump didn't get re-elected. He didn't start any new wars. The irony is, if he'd gone to war against Iran, he probably would have been,
well, he tried to
re-elected.
I think
he didn't
they'd
quite
hope.
get it off the ground. He didn't quite get it off the ground, But Biden desperately wants a war with China or Russia. And the irony is, of course, it's good for the Russia, it's good for Putin and it's good for Xi. It's fantastic for them. If you actually want to destabilize a regime, peaceful relations are much better. But they don't care. They don't really want to cause change in China. It's all used as a political ammunition because people will vote for politicians who drop bombs, basically. Unfortunately, the psychology as such, it makes you look strong. The PR people love it. They love enemies. You instantly get a boost in the poll if you talk about going to war with some far-off country. The arms manufacturers obviously love it. They give you Boeing and McDonnell Douglas. They'll give you lots of big donations. We saw this in Afghanistan, where they had a very, very useful plane. I mean, that's not even, they try to promote it as if we're helping the soldiers and we care about the soldiers and we care about the lives of people in Taiwan or Ukraine or Afghanistan. They don't care about the lives of the people in those countries. They saw when the US were fighting the Russians in Afghanistan in the 1980s, and they just poured weapons in. But as soon as the Russians left, the US pulled out, and Afghanistan was ruined for the next 100 years. And the same thing will happen in Taiwan and Ukraine. They're not really trying to help any people around the world. We saw it they had a very good old airplane in Afghanistan, the A-10, the Warthog.
Right.
And it did the job very well for fighting the Taliban. It was slow. It had a big cannon on it. And if you were stuck in a Taliban ambush, this thing could save your life. Now, they phased them out. And they phased them out for sort of the F-35, and who didn't do the job nearly as well. It cost $8 billion or some ridiculous figure per jet. And the only reason that they could have done that was because the arms lobby forced them into it. And it was bad for soldiers. And that's the way things go. The most expensive equipment, whether it works or not, is this equipment that gets bought. And that is because the lobbyists the revolving door, as we call it, between people
Yeah.
who leave the military and go to work for Boeing and McDonnell Douglas, etc. And it ensures we just buy expensive equipment all the time. And this is one of the reasons why I believe they eventually left Afghanistan, because it wasn't lucrative enough. It was pretty lucrative for the people who built bases, but you couldn't sell enough F-35s. You couldn't sell enough aircraft carriers.
Yeah,
and
Ukraine's much more profitable.
War against China, that's much more profitable. So we moved out of one. And I think the only reason they moved out of Afghanistan is that they knew China and Ukraine were ready to go. And so they had these emerging markets and they were back, have reestablished the Cold War, even though the Russians are not communists anymore. People seem to forget that. We used to be fighting against communists, and now we still fight the Russians. We still hate the Russians, even though they're not communists. And no one has said, well, hang on, what? So was it all, and the Chinese as well, apparently, were, the Chinese are doing terrible, terrible things, but there is nothing the US hasn't done. We've got our own black sites where we take people off and torture them to death. I was asked when in the Ukraine incident, someone put on Twitter, but do you think the invasion of the Ukraine is illegal? And this is one of my most popular tweets. And I said, the law is only what we enforce, and we can't hold other leaders to account for doing things that we do ourselves and say are okay. And that tweet went through the roof. And but yeah, we can't. We invade countries. We've got all sorts of excuses about why we do it, but even when we got caught out that the weapons of mass destruction was a lie, there was no accountability.
Yeah.
We make up figures. The worst thing about the collateral damage, which was exposed by a collateral murder exposed by Assange, was not so much that the helicopter pilots shot civilians, but the fact that the US military command then doctored the video and gave a press conference and said everything was okay. Now, that's the real problem. That's a big problem when you've got the command. This is what motivated Chelsea Manning to say that she knew that the command were lying in their public statements,
right,
in order to protect, hide what actually went on, and the administration would have been quite happy with that. Probably why they pardoned her in the end, but. That's disgusting to say that, we have got this 1984, people we used to think were conspiracy theorists, and, that's now reality. This was the leadership, the US military involved in cover-up conspiracy, false flag. We are the bad guys. We have become the bad guys of the world. And that is not good enough for me. I can't just accept that. I can't just... as a soldier, someone that swore on a Bible in front of a flag to do the right thing, I can't just accept that. And I have to do something. I have to stand up. They need to answer those charges. It's not good enough, in my case, that they just don't even look at those substantive charges. Maybe they can say, oh, look, it's not true, et cetera, et cetera. But of course, they're not even going to let those issues be looked at. And the same as Assange's case. They're going to use anything to shut me up, to shut me down, to stop evidence going in. Again, it proves my point that everything is wrong. But, and as I said, it's not so much about me getting satisfaction, but it comes back to my own personal sense of values, standing up tall, looking them in the eye and saying, do what you will with me, like the sort of people that I admire from 500 years ago that were burnt at the stake, and who didn't cry out and didn't give in and just said, I do this for freedom and truth. And you can do what you want with me, but I'm never going to back down. And get some sort of personal satisfaction out of that.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to add one thing about what you mentioned now, that video with the helicopter. I recall there were two journalists there from Reuters who were killed, and the Baghdad bureau chief, he went to the Americans about this, and they played him a doctored video. They played the first 3 minutes and then didn't show him the rest. And I think it's only, I don't know how, this, so 2007, yeah, so 3-4 years until he actually saw the full video, and it's only because it was published. So I remember because he actually testified in court about that. So just thought I'd add that to what you just said. And I understand what you're getting at, that it's not just the war crimes. In addition to that, it's a far bigger problem. It's systemic, it's not even just in Australia, right? It's something that's happening in the UK, in the US, in all the Five Eyes countries, and beyond. Yeah. And David, I know you've got a meeting and you have to go, but I just wanted to ask you, what can the viewers do to help your case? The GoFundMe is here. I'll pull that up on the screen, but is there anything else people can do to help?
No, the GoFundMe I'd be very grateful for. And I've got a YouTube channel, David McBride. And I'm slowly trying to build up a bit of a presence. I'm a bit off your lofty heights, but and watching you, I've got to get a better camera and better lighting. But have a look at my YouTube. I think some of you might enjoy it, but I'd be very grateful for any donations.
Okay, I'm putting the link in the chat so people can see it. And here's your Twitter. You said you have a YouTube as well. So is it the same?
Yeah, it should be. If you go on that the link tree, I think you'll see the YouTube.
Okay, great. All right, so the link is in the bio, I think, and I'll pull it up on
somewhere.
All right, give me a second. I'll put it in the chat. And David, I just wanted to say one more thing. Just as a final note, I really appreciate everything you've done. My mother is also watching. She said that she thanks you for standing up for the truth. She's proud of you, and not just for the whistleblowing you did in what happened in the ADF, but the stuff you said about Syria, for example, like just during our chat now and before. So she appreciates that very much, as do I. And there are lots of nice comments in the chat. I can't read them all, but people are saying that they're subscribed to your channel, so that's good. And we posted the link there as well. So I just really appreciate you coming on the show and speaking with you again. It's really important, and I'm going to be thinking about you a lot all the time, and wishing you the best of luck for your case, and I'll be making the case for you as well, as long and as loudly as I can.
No, you've got a special place in my heart, as does Syria, because when I was fighting with the Defence Force early on, and I was mainly focused on Afghanistan, and I was living on, they were trying to gaslight me, but a guy came to install my TV, and he was Syrian. And he said, do you want to hear the truth about what's going on? And I said, yep, absolutely. And we became firm friends. And because I knew then, I could see it was the same issue. It was the same issue. And he said, what you read in the Australian newspapers about Syria is largely bullshit. And I thank him. I still remember him. Ali, I put him in my phone. And so yeah, you've got a special place in my heart, you guys, and I hope to come to go there one day and do something about it.
Yeah, that would be lovely. I'll show you around. So thank you again, David. I appreciate it very much. And everybody, please go subscribe to David's YouTube channel. The link is in the chat, and there's the GoFundMe and his Twitter as well. You'll find them in the description, and like I said, in the live chat. Please remember to hit the like button. It helps the algorithm promote the video so more people see it. And please make sure you share it so we get the word out about David's case and his whistleblowing. Again, thank you so much, David McBride. I appreciate it. And
thank
God
you, my
bless.
friend. Thank you. God